All right, what's going on, everybody? Generate Nation, I'm excited to be here and just have the opportunity for another Bible study. Obviously, you see we're doing it a little bit different because I got my dad with us today.
Hello,
hey, everybody.
Good to see you.
And we're sitting at the table where I grew up, where he taught us, every single night for dinner. He asked my mom to bless us with food every night for two reasons. Number one, because he can't cook, and number two, because he can't cook. So we would sit around this table that we're at right now having conversations about life and all of those different things. And so we want to invite you into the conversation for our Bible study tonight. Now we're doing a little bit different. I'm recording it because Kanika and I are going to be in the woods at the time this Bible study plays with our family, doing it like a camping trip. And there's not going to be any Wi-Fi or sufficient LTE out there. So we wanted to record it, still give you the meat that you can chew on for this session, but also make sure it's there for you. And so that's why we're doing it the way we're doing it. So we're just going to go ahead and jump right in for tonight's Bible study. So you just were preaching this Sunday. This Sunday you preached and you talked about righteousness and justice, and it's very important because Psalm 89:14 talks about how righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. And in this season, there's a lot that's up in the air about it, as we're trying to make decisions on in a political season, but also in our personal lives. Just give us a quick summary of what you talked about and how it applies to us.
Well, over and over again in Scripture, righteousness and justice are paired together as equals. Over and over again, they are tied together. They're like Siamese twins. They're joined at the hip, and they aren't to be separated. When we talk about righteousness, we're talking about our moral walk with God and obedience. Justice is our equitable application of that moral law horizontally among people. And the problem is when those two get divided, I talked about the fact that's like destroying the Twin Towers in New York. I mean, when the enemy can destroy one tower and then destroy the other tower, then you have chaos. You have to have a standard by which right and wrong is measured, righteousness. But then you got to make sure that standard is being appropriately applied among people, regardless of their background or race or gender or culture, that God has one standard. And the Bible says there's only one lawgiver, James 4:12. So God wants to set the standard. Now, the closer you are to that standard of righteousness and justice, the more ordered society will be. The further you are from that one standard of righteousness and justice, the more chaotic society will become. So the reason why society is in chaos is we've wandered away from both as God has defined them.
Yeah, well, listen, Bible study over. Everybody done? I mean, that's perfect in understanding, especially righteousness and justice, the vertical standing with God, which means that God is supposed to be the one to make the standard. And I think that what you're saying is the further we get away from God's standard, then even what you may be trying to apply horizontally will still be messed up.
It'll still be messed up because you could be applying the wrong thing even if you're trying to apply it equally. So you can have equal laws for men that don't agree with the law of God, which means the law of men will be destructive rather than beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of the things that you mentioned that I thought was important was that without justice, righteousness cannot exist. So without being able to apply it appropriately, then you just took righteousness away. Even if righteous is righteous, if it's not applied, then that messes up. So we have an application. Sometimes we have a righteousness problem, but then sometimes there's an application problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And when either one is missing, things are disjointed, disconnected, and it's like a seesaw. I mean, one is up, one is down, so you never have the equilibrium and the order that should be being portrayed among people. So you have strife, and you have racism, and you have culturalism, and you have a breakdown of family. You have it working itself out in every dimension of society because men have done what Adam and Eve did and decided to go to the Google tree rather than to the revelation of God.
Yeah, absolutely. So personalize this for us, because fortunately for me, you and Mommy put me, Priscilla, Crystal, and Anthony in an environment where a lot of the things you guys experience, we didn't experience. And a lot of the things that millennials are learning about, you learned from an experiential level. Like, we're not baby boomers. There's some things that you experienced that we didn't experience.
Right.
And so take us back to some of the ways that righteousness was not applied justly in your own personal life.
Well, when God has a standard, you take the issue of race. That's a big issue today. God talks about the fact that all men have the image of God on them, but when you had injustice in society, that was not applying a truth that the Constitution espoused to, that the church espoused to, but wasn't being lived out and applied in society or in the church. So justice and righteousness became separated, which means there was confusion and continues to be confusion in the world.
Yeah, and so take me to you. So was there anything that you and Two Daddy, I know you talked about Two Daddy's my granddad, y'all. So if I say Two Daddy and Two Mama, that's his parents. Okay, the second set of grandparents, we call them Two Mama and Two Daddy. But I remember you saying, why you're asking your dad, like, why is it this way? Why can't we go here? Mm-hmm. Why can't we? So I just want everybody to hear maybe something that you experienced growing up at that time.
Mm-hmm. Well, it was called the White Tower Restaurant, and it was like a hamburger place growing up, and I wanted to get hamburgers. My father was explaining, well, we can't go there because they don't let people in. You can order out, but you can't go inside and order because they don't service, he would say, Negroes there. And so that was kind of confusing. I was coming to understand segregation in a little clearer way. So that was the way. And then he was telling me about some churches that were known as fundamental believing churches, fundamentalist churches they were called back then, that black people couldn't go to. So that was another lesson in segregation, and this was by the church. So he was explaining that to me, growing up in a segregated environment.
How old were you then? What would
10,
you say?
11.
So you're 10, 11 at that time. So you got restaurants and you have churches.
Both.
That believe in righteousness, but were operating unrighteously because it wasn't being applied.
Absolutely. They were being unjust. That means they were not being biblically loving. So actually, when you're operating with injustice, you have denied righteousness.
That's right.
So
that's what I'm talking about.
That's why the two can't be separated. They have to be intricately tied. I think the beauty of your generation and the generation following you is that because the laws have been changed, even so though many hearts haven't been changed, you have the opportunity to be able to construct a new kind of environment that is not limited by some of the things that we experienced that led to the civil rights movement.
Absolutely. Man, I hope y'all are getting this. This is big time stuff. And you also talked to me about seminary, that you went to a church. There was actually a church divide. So you were 10 when you experienced, righteousness and justice not being applied to you. But then when you became, what were you, 22, 23, 24 when you were in Dallas Theological Seminary?
Yeah.
So that's another 14 or 15 years where, tell us that story, where a professor brought you to the church. How did that happen?
Well, there was a college event and there was a seminary event. Those are two separate events.
Okay, gotcha.
The one in college was, I went to church with a professor, and that church let it be known that they did not want an African American coming there, and the church split over it.
But the college was a Christian college.
The college was a Christian college, Christian professor, and a Bible teaching church. And when I went to the church with the professor, they let it be known. So my professor left the church, and a whole bunch of other people left, and that church split. They wound up calling me years later to come back, and they apologized. In seminary, there was a professor in seminary who was pastoring a church, and the deacons let me and my wife know that this was not a place where we were really welcomed. Okay, so because the people had been ingrained in unrighteous thinking, so unjust action.
Unjust action because of unrighteous thinking.
Right.
So that takes me to my next point. I'm going to jump. The church's responsibility in this season. because from the apartheid to the American church, how much are we to blame if we're supposed, if the lawgiver is God, James 4:12. Okay, make sure you put these verses in, Raylan. James 4:12, Psalm 49. 89:14, Psalm 89:14. Make sure you
Genesis 18:19.
Genesis 18:19. We'll get to the family, but tell us, Matthew 5:13, salt of the earth. Like we have a part to play in this, a huge role. So what should that look like as the church, meaning us, and our role in the chaos, like you just explained?
Well, we have contributed greatly to the problem because we have not been the proper conscience for the culture. We have contributed to the problem because we acquiesced to it rather than challenged it and refused to operate that way. Because the culture was wrong and we must obey God rather than man. And because the church failed, thus giving tacit approval to the unrighteous action and related to that issue, then the culture had nothing to look to in order to find its way. And therefore it operated based on its own understanding, which was unrighteous, illegal, and everything else. But that's the way it operated. If the church would have taken its stand, then the culture would have either had to adjust it, or the church and the culture would have been in major conflict because it would not have acquiesced.
Yeah, and that's the thing with the church. It's almost like we don't recognize that all authority has been given to Jesus, and therefore that we're supposed to be operating in that authority, that he's the lawgiver. So go into that.
Well, Jesus Christ has been given all authority. He's the head. But Ephesians 1:22 and 23 says we are his body. The body executes what comes from the brain. So we are the visual executioners of what the head tells us to do. But when the head says one thing and the body does something else, then you need a hospital. There's something wrong with you.
Something wrong with you.
So the body often does not do what the head says, not only on this issue, but there can be a lot of righteousness issues related to life and the definition of life, related to family and marriage, related to a lot of them. Whenever the body is doing something than what the head says, then that entity is sick. So the culture has had to deal with the sick church.
And that's helping the culture devolve. That's what Matthew 5:13, the salt.
That's right. The salt preserves, the light illuminates. So if there is no preserving, the meat's going to decay. And if the light's not on, people are going to trip. And cultures trip because they can't see the right way to go.
Because of the church. And that's one of the things that we always have to remember. But it's our job as individuals. What can you do? What can I do as individuals to actually be just, be righteous, and be just? Because a lot of times, people see us as individuals and they're not seeing the church. They're not seeing the body executing what the brain says. And because they're not seeing us doing it, and the reason why we're doing it is because we're involved in the culture. We're so involved and ingrained in the culture that the church is really nowhere to be found other than brick and mortar. Like, I see the brick and mortar, but I don't see you. I see the brick and mortar, but I don't see me. So they're not really seeing the church just by seeing brick and mortar. They see the church when his people are functioning based on what comes from his word.
Absolutely.
Is that a good word?
Yeah, that's a good word. You're coming along. All right. So the whole idea is that in my personal life, how am I reflecting and manifesting justice and righteousness? How am I operating by God's standard and relating to other people based on those standards? And when those two are paired up and people see me doing it and then see my influence in the sphere of my influence doing it, and you get enough people in churches doing it, then it becomes an invasion force into the culture.
It starts with us as individuals, but what happens in the culture comes from the incubator of all individuals in the image of God, which is the family. And you talked about that. So you talked about Genesis 18:19. Take us through Genesis 18:19 and even what parents can be thinking as they do it as individuals, but they also teach it.
Well, God tells Abraham in Genesis 18:19 to raise his children with an understanding of righteousness and justice, because a lot of the unrighteousness and injustice is transferred through families. Parents train children in the wrong way, either by what they say or by how they function. So the kids begin a belief system that they transfer. And God is a generational God for blessing or for cursing. So therefore, if you're transferring generationally the wrong information or the wrong application, then it's going to perpetuate itself for years and decades and even centuries. So what you've got to do is rebuild the family to rebuild the direction so that the next generation is thinking different and functioning different.
How can parents and future parents do that practically? What did you do with us growing up? How do you do that?
Well, the main thing is you use the table to instill kingdom values. What's right based on what God says? What's just based on what God says? Let God be true and every man a liar. So you have to, because the culture is giving so much false information to our children in education and media and entertainment, then we've got to combat that with giving them the right information, and our voice has got to be louder than the culture's voice.
That's right.
Because the culture's voice is screaming. So we got to be, we got to be with a bullhorn.
I hope y'all are getting this. I'm going to these questions because I'm pulling it out of them. I'm just pulling it out of them. Because you've explained perfectly what we need to explain to ourselves, to our friends, to our children, and sitting around the table and having those conversations that we want to be in right alignment with God. And then we want to apply that right alignment with others. That's righteousness and justice. If you just do this and then do this, you have the vertical and the horizontal. But also, how does forgiveness and mercy and grace fall into this when you have the forgiveness that we've received, from Jesus Christ because of our unrighteousness and our lack of ability to apply those things? Because right now you have a harsh, divided, disunified world, even amongst Christians. It's harsh, it's divided, and a lot of times people are being unrighteous as they look at as they look at things that may be unjust. They're unrighteous in their approach. So how does forgiveness and grace and mercy, the sheepdogs, if you will, and maybe he'll tell you about that. We got a little illustration about sheepdogs. We call them grace and mercy. They round you up when you've gone astray. But how can we be round up by those words?
Well, first of all, God, the distinctive word for Christians is the word love. Men will know you're my disciples by your love. Love is the decision to compassionately, righteously, and responsibly seek the well-being of another. So we have always got to offer compassion. People may not receive it, but it should never be void that we offered it. Because everybody doesn't approach the problem of unrighteousness and injustice because that's what they want to do. That's just how they've been programmed to do it. And you don't always know the distinction of that. And therefore, to offer mercy and to offer clarity and to offer understanding. Now, if the person rejects it, that's a different story. But don't let it be said you didn't offer it when it was needed, because sometimes that offer can lead to, I'm sorry, I was wrong, and it brings a clarification. So we are to render judgment, but not without love and compassion.
That's very important. One of the things that you just said was very important. And that is that there are some people who have programmed, they've come out of a family or they've been taught something and they're learning along the way. And without the grace and mercy that we've received as we've learned along the way, then we are not operating in righteousness and justice while complaining about it.
Absolutely.
Because we're not applying.
We are committing the sin we're complaining about. And when you're committing the sin you're complaining about, you got to confess your sin as you want them to confess theirs.
Listen, this is so good. Okay, any final words that you want to give the people who are watching as it relates to this subject? Just challenge them.
Yeah, be what you expect. If you want people to treat you righteously, be a righteous person. If you want people to treat you justly, be a just person. Be what you expect. Transfer that philosophy to those under the sphere of your influence. Get enough people doing it, and we can make a dent in the mess that we are in as a society.
Listen, we are the church. The authority has been given to him. We are his body. And so we're not supposed to be splitting righteousness and justice. It says righteousness and justice, Psalm 89:14 says righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. What if you had a half of a foundation of a skyscraper? What if you had a half of a foundation of your home? It would come crumbling down. And while politics may, in some ways, make us think we have to choose between the two, the Bible doesn't. And we're supposed to be his body. We're not supposed to be anybody else's body. And so we want to carry a full slab, a full foundation, so that we can actually build something that matters. Okay, listen. This is my favorite part. This is your favorite part. This is our favorite part. This is where we get to go and communicate about these ideas. Okay, so what we're going to do right now is I'm going to pass the ball to Raylyn because I'm on a recording right now. So I'm going to pass the ball to Raylyn, who's live with you right now, so that she can introduce the questions. Remember, take a screenshot with your phone so that you can go into groups, because we want to hear from you. We want to know, how have you been treated unjustly? What have you experienced in your life? And how can you build a full foundation of righteousness and justice as you continue to move forward? The church has to be the church, so we want to talk about it as the church. All right? Raylyn, I'm passing the ball to you. We'll see you guys next time. Blessings.